I'm ExpandTheRoom. I'm going to talk a little bit about accessibility, which is important for every website, but especially important if you have a government website or you're working on an essential service. So let's get into some of the basics. Okay, so some of the basic things that every website should have is a sensitivity to color and organization. So you should use high contrast colors in case people's visual acuity isn't as high. And you should absolutely avoid using only color to convey information in case someone's colorblind. As I'll get into later, many people use what are called screen readers, so they're programs that read the website for them. And it's important to have a clearly organized website, so header, section, navigation, in order to help screen readers. Okay, so there are multiple levels of compliance. There's single A, which is relatively basic stuff. There's double A, which is a standard goal and is going to be absolutely required by law if you're running a public website, a university or a government website. And then there's a AAA standard, which is very strict. So as an example of AAA standard, you would need, like all your videos would have to be accessible. So you would need sign language and at the very, in addition to easier things to get, like automatic transcription, in case someone cannot hear. Okay, so there's a pretty long list of detailed standards put out by WC3, and you can check those out if you like. Okay, so when someone is designing or working as a developer on a website, one of the key things to think about is keyboard navigation, which most people do not think about since they use a mouse or their thumb. So keyboard navigation is that you use the keyboard and usually use the tab index in order to move around a website. So the tab index is a list of interactive elements on the page. So it's going to be the buttons, the navigation links, any form. And then you usually use tab to move to the next one, and you can do other things like shift tab to move back. So people with fine motor control issues usually use keyboard navigation. And in addition, back to screen readers, which are programs that read the website for you, obviously anyone who can't see the website is going to have to rely on keyboard navigation. They're not going to be able to use the mouse. So I have a little screenshot, right, of how you could make keyboard navigation more accessible. So the focused element is the Order Now link, and it has a nice orange box around it, so it's very clear, even to someone whose visual acuity isn't as high. Okay, so in order to make things accessible, you want to make sure that it's visually obvious which element has focus. Importantly, this is functionality. You need to make sure that all the important elements are actually added to the tab index. So that means that you have to be able, using keyboard navigation, to get to the menus, to get to the forms. And what's important here is that if the page changes dynamically, you may have to update the tab index or change which elements gain focus. So if you open a menu, the tab index can't remain on the page that's now covered if you open an overlay. It's also important that you give the user a way to just skip the nav. So if you imagine having to tab through everything in the header, that would be annoying. So it's usually best to have a skip button that goes right to the main content on the page. Let me show you what I mean by the menu. So here's something pretty standard. You click something, usually a hamburger, and then an overlay appears on mobile, right? So there are some challenges to this with accessibility. First, it has to become obvious to someone who's just using a screen reader that this happened, and you have to make sure that the locations order now are added to the tab index so that when you hit tab, it will move to those, and that something in this overlay that's actually shown has to have focus, right? So that you can move through it. So things like that are important to keep in mind, and they're easy to miss as a developer who is not usually using keyboard navigation. So that can be an important thing on your website. And failing keyboard navigation would be a complete accessibility failure. So it's absolutely required. Okay, so back to screen readers and how you could try them out. Right, so screen readers are usually used with keyboard navigation. So the way the screenshots I have demonstrate the element with focus is they have an orange box around them. What a screen reader will do is it will just read that element. So if the orange box is on navigation that says locations, it will say something like link locations. You can do a number of things to help screen readers. You can include what are called ARIA labels, so they describe things. So a screen reader will read them, but a user who is using a normal browser won't see the ARIA labels. They're sort of like optional image alt tags. Right? Image alt tags are also important, but you can add the equivalent on basically any element. So professional quality screen readers are usually not free, but you can get a feel for the experience by trying out ChromeVox, which is a free Chrome extension. And I would certainly suggest people try to use their website with just a screen reader and not looking at it, so that they can get an understanding of how hard it would be for someone who is blind or sufficiently visually impaired. Okay, another thing is that if the content changes dynamically, the screen reader needs to alert the user. So we already gave an example of that, which would be an overlay menu. But another example is error messages, right? So if you have a customer login and it says invalid login credentials, somehow you have to alert someone who's using a screen reader. So the obvious thing to do is to make sure that the error message gains focus, and then the screen reader will read it, right? Now it has the orange box. So the screen reader will read whatever is in the orange box whenever that changes. Okay, so if you're interested in working with ExpandTheRoom, we have an accessibility policy. We have standards we follow on all projects. If you're a site that requires higher levels of accessibility, we also are capable of doing that. And just to give an example of how avoiding accessibility can create serious legal problems, the University of California put up a ton of videos, but they were unable to or unwilling to make those videos accessible, and so they wound up taking most of them down. So you really need to keep in mind the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you should focus on having an inclusive website. Okay, thanks.